Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
Metal shrieked against stone as James Rowan fought the controls of his hybrid starship. The RV-7 amphibian, his life's greatest engineering achievement, bucked and shuddered beneath his hands, storm waves hammering its hull with relentless force. Lightning fractured the alien sky, illuminating the cockpit in brutal flashes of electric blue that revealed the strain etched into his weathered face. Eyes narrowed, jaw clenched, every muscle tensed against the violence of descent. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth, eyes fixed on the navigation display where red warnings multiplied by the second. "Just hold together." Not now. Not when we're so close. The amphibian represented 15 years of James's life, a revolutionary vessel designed for seamless transition between void, atmosphere, land, and water. Its triple-layered hull incorporated self-healing polymers that could seal minor breaches automatically. The adaptive ballast systems could shift tons of liquid counterweight in milliseconds to maintain stability in any environment. Most impressively, the propulsion array could reconfigure from vacuum thrusters to aquatic impellers in seconds, allowing the ship to dive from orbital entry directly into ocean depths without pause. No other ship in the colonial fleet could match its versatility, which was precisely why he'd chosen it for this desperate mission to an unmapped water world at the edge of charted space, far from established trade routes and patrol boundaries, far from those who pursued him. But even engineering genius had limits. This storm pushed every system beyond design parameters. Rain hammered the viewport like railgun fire, while hurricane-force winds howled through external sensors, bending communications arrays and threatening to tear away the stabilization fins. The ship's diagnostic systems flashed cascading failures across his secondary displays, each one triggering a new alarm tone until the cockpit filled with a cacophony of electronic panic. James toggled his command bracelet, activating the archival retrieval system. "Ship log, playback file, Sarah 7. The cabin filled with a child's laughter, bright, unburdened, alive. Then a voice, higher pitched but unmistakably confident. "Daddy, I built a water engine today. Mrs. Holt said it's the best she's ever seen from a 9-year-old. I used the hydraulic principles you taught me, but I added my own compression chamber that makes it 30% more efficient. Can we test it in the lake when you get back from your mission? I calculated that it could power a small shuttle across the entire lake on just half a liter of water." Oh, and I figured out what was wrong with the atmosphere scrubbers in the residential dome. It wasn't a filtration problem at all. It was a pressure differential in the... James closed his eyes briefly as his daughter's voice washed over him, a momentary anchor in the chaos of the storm. He'd archived hundreds of these messages over the years, Sarah detailing her inventions, her discoveries, her dreams of following him into engineering. She'd been brilliant, intuitive in ways that even veteran engineers weren't. She would have surpassed him easily had she lived. The recording continued as James navigated through the storm, his daughter's voice a counterpoint to the ship's warning klaxons. The nav system indicated a deep channel ahead, a possible path to calmer waters below the storm's reach. If he could just get the amphibian beneath the turbulence... "End playback," he said, voice thick. The recording cut off mid-sentence. Sarah's enthusiasm for her latest creation silenced just as abruptly as her life had been. 5 years since the colony virus had taken her. 5 years piloting this ship alone through void and atmosphere, water and rock, with nothing but recordings and memories. 5 years running from the corporate enforcers who wanted his research, his ship, his technology. The same technology that had failed to save Sarah when she needed it most. And one rusted rattle, her first engineering project as she'd called it, modified by her toddler hands to produce different tones when shaken in specific patterns. The toy she'd clutched during those final hours as the virus consumed her small body. His radar showed clear passage ahead, a deep channel between submerged basalt formations. The ship's scanning systems confirmed safe clearance, the topographic rendering showing sufficient depth for the amphibian's hull. But technology could fail. James knew that better than most. And on this world it did. The basalt spire rose from nowhere, invisible to his instruments until the moment of impact. 1 second he was threading the needle through the storm. The next, something massive and jagged tore through the hull beneath him with the sound of a planet cracking open. The impact threw him forward against his restraints with bone-crushing force. Warning klaxons screamed as primary systems failed in cascading sequence. The ship listed violently to port as seawater flooded the lower compartments. Status indicators flashed crimson across his console. Hull breach, catastrophic, multiple compartments compromised. No, no, no! He slammed his fist against the emergency sealing protocols, but it was too late. The amphibian self-healing systems engaged. Polymer sealants flooding into breaches, but the damage was too extensive. The balancing mechanisms failed as water weight dragged the vessel sideways. Through the viewport, he watched in horror as the nose dipped beneath the waves, water climbing rapidly up the glass. This wasn't a controlled landing, it was a death plunge. James unclasped his harness and lunged for the storage compartment behind his seat. His fingers punched the emergency release. The panel slid open to reveal the only two objects that truly mattered. A sealed, waterproof archive containing all recordings of Sarah, her voice, her image, her data logs, everything he had left of her. And beside it, the child's rattle, rusted with age and salt, its modified interior still somehow functional after all these years. The ship tilted further, a sickening lurch that sent him crashing against the bulkhead. Water began seeping through sealed door frames, then pouring through in frigid torrents. He had seconds, not minutes. His hands closed around both objects, one in each fist, the archive in his left, the rattle in his right. The deck beneath him groaned as structural supports gave way. The ship lurched again, more violently. The sudden motion tore the archive from his grasp. It slid across the flooding floor toward a jagged tear in the bulkhead, where water gushed inward with terrifying force. James lunged after it, floodwater already at his knees, then his waist. His fingers brushed the archive's waterproof casing, almost gaining purchase before another wave knocked it farther from reach. The ship tilted again. The archive skidded toward the rupture. One choice, one moment, one impossible decision. He could save the archive, all digital traces of Sarah, her voice forever preserved, or keep his grip on the rattle. The only physical object she had touched had changed, had made her own. Data versus matter, memory versus substance. James dove through the rising water, rattle clutched in his right hand, left arm outstretched for the archive. His fingers closed around its edge just as the ship gave a final, terrible shudder. The hull split open beneath him with an ear-splitting crack of composite materials giving way. Water erupted upward with explosive force, tearing both objects from his grasp. In that chaos of rushing water and failing light, James made his choice. He let the archive go, watched it vanish into the churning darkness, and twisted his body through the current, desperate fingers searching, finding, closing around the rattle once more. The ocean claimed him entirely then, the pressure crushing his chest as he sank. The cold penetrated his survival suit immediately, finding every seam, every connector, numbing his limbs with frightening speed. He kicked toward what he thought was the surface, but disorientation seized him. Which way was up? The storm-tossed waters offered no reference point, only darkness and the growing weight of the deep pressing against his eardrums, his sinuses, his eyes. His lungs burned. The survival suit's emergency oxygen system activated, but he knew it would provide air for minutes at most. Not enough, not nearly enough to reach the surface in this chaos. As consciousness began to fade, edges of his vision darkening, something seized his ankle, a grip like iron, inhuman in its strength. For an instant, James thought some predator had claimed him. Then the grip shifted, clamping around his waist with precise control, dragging him downward faster, but not toward death, toward salvation. Through dimming vision, James saw lights blooming below, not the electric blue of lightning, but something steadier, colder, more alien. White columns rising from the seabed, structures that pulsed with internal energy, a city beneath the waves. His oxygen reserves depleted, his consciousness flickered. The last sensation he registered was the rusted rattle still clutched in his fist, pressing against his palm as darkness took him completely. Light penetrated his eyelids, soft, diffuse, unlike sunlight. James blinked awake, his body aching as if every muscle had been stretched to breaking. He lay on a smooth surface that curved beneath him, neither warm nor cold. Above him arched a dome of what appeared to be coral glass. Translucent material shot through with organic patterns that refracted the light into prismatic rivers across the floor. He sat up slowly, wincing at the protest of abused muscles. Surrounding him stood columns of alien machinery, half living, half forged. They pulsed with internal light, tendrils of bioluminescence crawling through transparent conduits like electric blood. Electricity and life somehow merged into technology beyond human understanding. And before him stood something more alien still. She was tall, nearly 8 feet, with blue steel skin that caught the light like burnished metal, shifting with subtle iridescence as she moved. 2 backwards sweeping horns rose from her skull, polished to a coral sheen and inscribed with intricate patterns that glowed faintly from within. Her face was almost human in structure, yet utterly foreign in its proportions. Cheekbones too sharp, jaw too angular, eyes set wider than any human's, their size at least twice what would be normal. Those eyes fixed on him now, white and glowing like underwater searchlights, cold as deep-sea ice, devoid of mercy or compassion. No pupils, no iris, just radiant white energy that seemed to pierce through him, cataloging his weaknesses. A heavy tail coiled behind her, muscular and armored with overlapping plates that clicked subtly as it moved. It wasn't merely an appendage. James could see how the musculature connected to her spine, how the plates interlocked with precision engineering. This was a weapon, a tool, a statement of power all at once. The smallest movement of that tail seemed to ripple through the chamber. Dozens of smaller figures lining the walls shifted in response, adjusting their postures, their own smaller tails mimicking the subtle movements of hers. A language of gesture and posture that communicated authority without a single word spoken. "You wake," she said. Her voice resonated like water rushing through ancient caves, deep, fluid, powerful. Each word carried undertones that vibrated in James's chest. "Good." James struggled to his feet, fighting waves of nausea. His survival suit had been stripped away, leaving him in the simple jumpsuit he'd worn underneath. He felt the rattle still clutched in his fist, somehow not lost in his near drowning. He slipped it into his pocket, not wanting to draw attention to it. "Where am I?" he managed, voice raw. "Who are you?" The tall figure's expression didn't change, but something like amusement rippled through her posture, a subtle shifting of weight, a slight tilting of those massive horns. Her tail uncurled slightly, then recoiled in what appeared to be their equivalent of a dismissive gesture. "You stand in Lysaria, last city of the Meridic people," she said, sweeping one arm in a gesture that encompassed the dome and presumably beyond. "I am Lyria, Queen of the Deep." When she moved, the crowd that James only now noticed lining the walls of the chamber moved with her. Dozens of smaller versions of her species shifting in unison, responding to micro-movements of her tail and horns as if receiving silent commands. Some clicked their teeth, others rippled the plates on their own smaller tails. All watched him with those same glowing eyes, their intensity varying only in degree. Only now did James notice they were not alone in the center of the chamber. Clustered at Lyria's side stood what appeared to be children, a dozen half-grown figures with the same blue steel skin, though theirs bore striped patterns in darker hues. Their horns were shorter, their faces rounder, but they shared the queen's glowing white eyes and armored tails. Each wore plates of dark chitin and metal, fitted to their bodies like segmented armor. The brood shifted restlessly, their tails twitching, eyes never leaving James. Something in their gaze, hunger, curiosity, or both, sent ice through his veins. "Why did you save me?" James asked, acutely aware of how exposed he was, how utterly at their mercy. Lyria's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, though it held no warmth. Her teeth gleamed like polished knives, each one slightly serrated at the edges. "Save." She pronounced the word as if tasting something unfamiliar. "No, I claimed you. Your vessel violated our waters. By rights, you belong to the deep now." She stepped closer, her immense height forcing James to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. Her proximity brought a scent like ozone and salt, like metal left too long in seawater. "But I offer terms. You will live, alien, at least until dawn." Her glowing eyes flicked toward the children. "My brood requires education." To demonstrate her point, her tail suddenly lashed out, striking a nearby column. The impact shattered the stone to powder, the sound like a gunshot in the enclosed space. James flinched involuntarily, acutely aware that the same blow would turn his bones to splinters. They are soft, untested, weak. Each word dripped with contempt. Make them strong by morning light. She leaned down until her face was inches from his, her breath cool against his skin. When the light shifts to the color of bone, we will judge if you have succeeded. Her voice dropped lower, resonating through his chest. If you fail, they will feast on your flesh while you still breathe. The watching crowd clicked their teeth in what appeared to be agreement. The children's eyes gleamed brighter, and James realized with dawning horror that the hunger in their gaze was literal. Several licked their lips with tongues that glowed with the same bioluminescence as their eyes. And if I refuse? He asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Lyria's smile widened, revealing row upon row of those knife-like teeth extending far back into her jaw. Then when dawn breaks over our deepest dome, they will feast on you. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a rumble that only he could hear. It has been long since they tasted alien meat. They wonder if your kind is sweet or bitter. One of the children made a hissing sound of anticipation, and several others joined in, creating a chilling chorus that echoed through the chamber. Lyria straightened to her full height. When light shifts to the color of bone, we will judge if you have succeeded, she gestured to the children, or if you become their lesson in another way. She turned away, her tail sweeping across the floor with a sound like steel on stone. Dawn approaches with each breath. Begin. The queen strode toward an arched doorway, the crowd parting before her like water around stone. The chamber emptied quickly, leaving James alone with the brood, whose hungry stares had only intensified. One of the children stepped forward, taller than the others, with deeper striping on his skin and horns that, while shorter than Lyria's, were still impressive compared to his peers. He moved with deliberate swagger, tail lashing behind him with barely contained aggression. He bared his teeth in what was clearly not a smile, eyes flaring brighter as he circled James like a predator, assessing prey. Show us your strength, surface thing, he hissed, if you have any. The other children spread out around James, forming a ring that effectively trapped him in their center. Their tails twitched in anticipation. Or don't, the tall one added with a sound like grinding metal that might have been laughter. Either way, we feast when the light changes. They escorted him through corridors of living stone and metal, downward through the underwater city. Bioluminescent creatures swarmed in recessed alcoves, providing cold, steady light. Everywhere, the alien architecture blended the organic and mechanical. Walls that seemed to breathe, doorways that opened like irises, conduits that pulsed with fluids and energy in equal measure. The people they passed, all with the same blue steel skin and horns, though varied in height and patterning, stopped to stare at James. Some hissed, others made clicking sounds with their teeth or lashed their tails against the floor. None seemed pleased by his presence. Children were hurriedly pulled away as he passed, as if his mere proximity might contaminate them. I am Krell, the tall child finally said, as they descended a spiraling ramp that seemed carved from a single massive shell. Firstborn of Queen Lyria, the strongest of her heirs. He emphasized this with a sharp lash of his tail that sent a nearby smaller child stumbling. Stop that, James said reflexively. Krell whirled on him, eyes flaring. You command nothing here, surface thing. You teach us strength, or you die. Those are your choices. Strength isn't about pushing others down, James replied, standing his ground despite the obvious danger. True strength. Save your air, Krell interrupted. We approached the training grounds. They arrived at what appeared to be a rusted dock, an ancient structure of corroded metal and stone that extended from the main dome into open water, partially enclosed by a smaller dome of the same coral glass. Tools and equipment lay scattered about, most showing signs of extreme age and neglect. Lifting mechanisms, welding apparatuses, sheet metal cutters, all corroded by salt water but still recognizable to an engineer's eye. James understood now. This was no random test. Lyria had chosen him specifically because he was an engineer. She wanted him to teach her children how to build, how to create. His hybrid ship, even in its destroyed state, had impressed her. A crowd had gathered, dozens of the Meridic people, adults and children, pressing against the boundaries of the dock. watching with those eerie glowing eyes. Word of the alien captive had spread quickly. Above, on a balcony carved from the living rock of the dome, stood Lyria, her imperious figure silhouetted against the diffuse light, her tail coiled and uncoiled with languid menace. "Begin," she commanded, voice echoing through the chamber. James looked at the brood surrounding him, 12 children of various sizes, all watching him with expressions ranging from open hostility to wary curiosity. Krell stepped forward again, chest thrust out, tail arched high. "I am firstborn," he announced loudly for the crowd's benefit. "What strength can a soft thing like you possibly teach us?" He gestured contemptuously at James's body. "No armor, no claws, no tail, no fangs. I see no strength worth learning." Several in the crowd clicked their teeth in agreement. Others made a sound like grinding metal. Laughter, James realized. James looked around at the rusted dock, at the ancient tools. He understood something deeper now. Looking at their predatory stances, their barely contained aggression, he knew they needed something more fundamental than engineering skills. "Line up," he said quietly. Krell bared his teeth, taking a threatening step forward. "You do not command us, alien." "I don't," James agreed, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But your mother commanded you to learn from me. So line up. Now." The smaller children glanced uncertainly at Krell, then at the queen watching from above. Reluctantly, with much tail lashing and teeth clicking, the brood formed a ragged line before him. The watching crowd murmured and chittered, clearly expecting entertainment. James walked to a pile of discarded metal plates, shields he realized, or something similar. Old, corroded, but still solid. He lifted two and returned to the line. "Combat training begins with defense, not attack," he said, handing the shields to the two smallest children in the brood. The training began simply. James showed them how to hold shields properly, how to brace against impact. The children followed his instructions with visible contempt, some openly mocking the exercise. "Shields up, cover each other," he instructed, positioning the children in pairs. "You move as a unit." Krell made a harsh sound that was definitely laughter. "Hiding behind metal? This is your strength?" He slammed his tail against the floor, cracking the surface. "We strike first, kill first. Shields are for cowards." The crowd chittered in agreement, some calling out in their own language, others making threatening gestures. From the balcony, Lyria watched silently, her expression unreadable, but her tail coiling tighter. A sign of tension, James guessed. "Strike first against what?" James challenged. "What if your enemy is stronger? What if there are more of them?" He moved among them, showing formations, how one could shield a fallen comrade while maintaining the defensive line. Strength isn't about who strikes hardest. It's about who remains standing longest. They practiced clumsily, grudgingly. Hours passed. Some pairs worked better than others. Krell and his partner barely tried, preferring to mock the exercise loudly for the crowd's benefit. Then it happened. "This is useless," Krell announced. Without warning, he whirled toward a smaller pair practicing nearby. Sark and another boy named Vern. Krell's tail lashed out with shocking speed, aiming directly for Sark's head. James moved. He threw himself between them, caught the blow on his shoulder. Something cracked. Pain exploded through his body. The dock fell silent. The crowd stared, not at Krell's attack, which seemed normal, but at James's intervention. "Why?" Krell demanded, genuinely confused. "Why protect the weak one?" James straightened, cradling his injured arm. "Because that's what strength is. Protecting those who need it." The crowd erupted in harsh laughter, metallic sounds that echoed through the dome like grinding machinery. They pointed at James, clutching his injured arm, their tails lashing in unison. "Surface soft! Surface soft!" some chanted. From above, Lyria's voice cut through the mockery. "Continue." They did for hours. James persisted despite the pain, showing formations, tactics, ways to use terrain. Some children, particularly Sark and Nera, began to show genuine interest. As the session continued, Sark attempted a playful swipe at Vern's shield. "Got through your guard," he said with what might have been the first genuine smile James had seen. A quick flash of white teeth that transformed his alien features into something almost endearing. The moment shattered when Sark stumbled during a complex maneuver, falling hard on the metal dock. His horn cracked against the floor. The boy's eyes widened in pain, and bioluminescent tears tracked down his blue steel cheeks. The brood hissed collectively. The crowd's laughter grew cruel. "Cull the weak!" someone shouted, and others took up the call. "Cull! Cull! Cull!" James knelt beside the boy, shielding him from view. Something in Sark's expression, fear mixed with resignation, struck a chord deep within James. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in Sarah's eyes during her final days. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the rusted rattle. He pressed it into Sark's hand. "Strength begins with guarding what can break," James said quietly. "Hold this. Stand up. Show them." Sark's fingers closed around the rusted toy. He stared at it, then at James, confusion written across his alien features. But he stood, clutching the rattle, and resumed his position. This time, when they moved through the defensive drill, Sark didn't falter. His shield stayed firm, his movements deliberate. The rattle remained clutched in his offhand, visible to all. The laughter died, not gradually but like a switch had been thrown. The crowd's mocking chittering stopped mid-note as hundreds of glowing eyes focused on the rusted toy. The silence was so complete that the sound of water lapping against the dock seemed thunderous. James looked up to see that Lyria had risen from her seat, her massive form rigid with attention. Her glowing eyes were fixed on the rusted toy, and for the first time since his arrival, her tail had gone completely still. For the first time since his arrival, James felt the tiniest spark of hope. Hours passed. The brood trained with growing confidence. James pushed them harder, introducing more complex formations. He took them to the water's edge where footing was treacherous, making them practice on the slick surface. As the artificial lights dimmed to simulate night, James allowed the exhausted brood to rest. Some still glared at him resentfully, but others watched him with new respect. Nira approached with what appeared to be food, a strange, glowing fruit sectioned into portions. She offered one to James. "You bleed for Sark," she said simply. "Eat. Regain strength." James accepted the offering. The flesh was cool and gelatinous, with a flavor somewhere between oyster and mango. Energy seemed to flow through him almost immediately. Sark approached hesitantly, the rusted rattle still in his hand. Other children followed, forming a loose semicircle around James. "Your arm," Sark said, gesturing to where Krell's tail had struck. "Does it pain you?" James nodded. "It's broken, I think, but it will heal." "Why did you take the strike meant for me?" Sark asked, genuine confusion in his luminous eyes. "Because that's what we do for our young," James replied simply. "We protect them." "Even the weak ones?" another child asked. "Especially them," James said. "The strong can protect themselves." This concept seemed to puzzle them deeply. Several exchanged glances, their tails twitching. "The toy," Nira said, pointing to the rattle. "What is its purpose?" James took the rattle gently. "On my world, we give these to our youngest children. It teaches them cause and effect. Shake it. Hear sound. It comforts them when they're afraid." He demonstrated, shaking it gently. The sound echoed strangely in the dock's acoustic space. He handed it back to Sark. "It belonged to my daughter." "Your brood?" Nira asked. "Yes," James said. "My only child." "Where is she now?" Sark asked. James looked away, out through the coral glass to the dark waters beyond. "Gone. She died, from a sickness our medicine couldn't cure." She was 9. Understanding rippled through the gathered children. Even in this alien culture, loss translated perfectly. Several of their tails drooped slightly. "Yet you keep her toy," Krell said from the edge of the group, his voice less hostile than before. "I keep what matters," James replied simply. "And what is that?" asked a new voice. The children scattered as Lyria herself descended from her balcony. Her massive form towered over them all, her tail coiled like a spring under tension. "What matters enough to keep?" Lyria repeated, those white eyes fixed on James. "What matters enough to risk drowning for a piece of rust?" James met her gaze steadily. "Memory matters. Connection matters. My daughter touched this, changed it, made it her own. It's the only physical thing I have left of her." "Memory," Lyria repeated as if testing the concept. "We remember our victories, our conquests." "Do you remember those you've lost?" James asked quietly. Lyria's eyes flared brighter, and her tail lashed once. A warning. We do not speak of the lost. The dead are weak. Then why do you rule? James challenged. If only strength matters, why have a queen at all? Why not let the strongest rule until someone stronger kills them? The crowd gasped. Lyria's expression darkened. But instead of striking him down, she tilted her head slightly, considering. Because chaos serves no one. Because the brood needs guidance to become strong. Her eyes narrowed. But your question borders on treachery, alien. Not treachery, James countered. Understanding. I'm trying to learn your ways as you commanded. This seemed to mollify her somewhat. You speak of memory, she said, of connection to the dead. This is weakness to us. Is it? James gestured to the children, to the rusted dock around them. Your people built this city. Those who designed it, constructed it, they're gone now, right? But you maintain what they created. You use it. You live in it. Lyria didn't respond, but something shifted in her posture. Memory isn't just sentiment, James continued. It's knowledge, experience, wisdom passed down. If you forget those who came before, you lose what they knew. Before Lyria could respond, a distant sound cut through the chamber, a deep resonating boom that made the coral glass vibrate. The children startled, several drawing closer together. Lyria whirled toward the sound, her tail arching high in alarm. Another boom echoed, louder this time. Warning lights began to pulse along the corridors, bathing everything in crimson. What is that? James asked, cold dread settling in his stomach. Lyria's answer was cut off by a third boom, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass and rushing water. Alarms began to blare throughout the city, a wailing, keening sound that set James's teeth on edge. Rest time is over, Lyria announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. Dawn approaches with violence. She fixed James with a hard stare. Now we will see if your lessons were worth anything, alien. She swept from the dock, her powerful tail carving gouges in the metal floor. The children looked to James, their earlier confidence evaporating. What happens now? Nera asked, her voice small. James picked up a shield, testing its weight. Now we find out if you were paying attention. The alarms grew louder. James gathered the brood in the center of the dock. Shields! Form up, he called over the wailing sirens. Remember your pairs! The children scrambled to obey. Even Krell fell into position. What's happening? James shouted to a meridic adult who rushed past with a weapon. Surface raiders, the alien snarled. They've breached the outer perimeter. Raiders. The word struck James like a physical blow. He'd been pursued to this planet by marauders, human pirates who preyed on isolated colonies, the same ones who'd driven him to attempt that desperate landing. Now they'd followed his ship's descent trail straight to the underwater city, and it was his fault. Lyria reappeared at the dock entrance, her massive form now clad in living armor, plates integrated with her body. Her tail had extruded serrated edges that gleamed in the pulsing red emergency lights. They approach from the southern access tunnels, she announced. Their weapons penetrate our outer defenses. We fall back to secondary positions. Her glowing white eyes fixed on James, then swept over the brood with their shields. Something like surprise flickered across her alien features. The hatchery lies between the raiders and this chamber, she said. If they breach it, our youngest will die. James understood immediately. This was his test. Defend the hatchery or fail and die. We'll hold them, he said, meeting her gaze. The brood is ready. Lyria's tail curled in skepticism. Their exosuits are powered armor from your world. Metal and energy weapons against children with shields. I think it's necessary, James replied. And I'll be with them. Lyria studied him for a moment, then inclined her head slightly. The southern access is the direct path to the hatchery. Hold there. She turned to leave, then paused. If you run, alien, I will find you before the raiders do. Then she was gone. James turned to the brood. This is real now, he said simply. Everything we practiced, it matters. Not for show, not for pride, for life. For life, Sark repeated quietly, clutching the rusted rattle. For life, Nera echoed. The phrase rippled through the brood, picked up by one child after another. Even Krell muttered it. Stay in formation, James instructed as he led them into the pulsing red corridors. Overlapping shields. Watch your partner's blind side. Move as a unit, they advanced through the winding passages, following emergency indicators toward the southern axis. The sounds of battle grew louder. The distinctive whine of energy weapons, the crash of breaking structures, shouts in both Meridic and human languages. They found themselves in a broad chamber with multiple access points. One massive doorway stood sealed, the hatchery. 3 other entrances branched off, one of which flickered with weapons fire and echoed with approaching shouts. There, James said, pointing to a narrower corridor where the raiders would have to funnel through. Form a semicircle. Brace the shields. The children moved quickly, setting up exactly as he'd shown them. James positioned himself behind the formation where he could see the whole battlefield and direct movements. Remember, one falls back, another steps in. Rotate on my command. Don't break formation no matter what. The lights flickered as something exploded nearby. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Sark flinched but held position. Beside him, Nera's breathing was rapid and shallow, her luminous eyes wide with fear. Then the raiders appeared. 3 figures burst into the chamber, humans in mechanical exosuits that augmented their size and strength to nearly match the adult Meridic warriors. Each suit was a nightmare of sharp angles and exposed hydraulics, with reinforced plating and integrated weapon systems. Their helmets resembled insect heads with multiple sensor arrays glowing red in the dim light. Water still dripped from their frames, evidence of their passage through flooded sections of the city. James recognized the insignia on their chest plates immediately. Helios Extraction Corps, corporate mercenaries who specialized in acquiring technology by any means necessary. The same group that had been hunting him for years. The lead raider stopped short at the sight of the children's defensive formation. Then, spotting James behind them, he raised a gauntleted hand. "Rowan!" The voice was electronically amplified, echoing through the chamber. "So this is where you've been hiding. Hand over the amphibians' navigation core, and maybe we let these fish kids live." James stepped forward, careful to stay behind the shield wall. "The ship is destroyed. There's nothing left to salvage." "Liar," the raider snarled. "Our scanners detected the core's signature. Active, intact. You have it somewhere." He raised his arm, revealing a mounted energy weapon. "Last chance before we start carving through your little shield bearers." James's mind raced. The navigation core contained not just the amphibian's navigation system, but all his research on adaptive propulsion, technology worth billions to companies like Helios. But he'd watched the ship sink. If the core had survived, "I don't have it," he called back, "but I know where it is. Let me go get it for you." "Nice try," the raider laughed. "You're not going anywhere. We'll take it from your corpse." He fired, a pulsing beam of energy that struck the center of the shield formation. Nera gasped as the impact traveled through her shield and upper arms, the metal growing hot against her palms. But she held on, distributing the impact as James had taught them. "Hold steady," James called. "Rotate front line on my mark." The raiders advanced, all 3 firing now. Energy weapons lashed against the shields, superheating the metal. From Krell's position, he could see the front row struggling, their shields beginning to glow red-hot. Despite his earlier contempt, he found himself admitting the aliens' tactics were working. Barely. "Now! Rotate!" The formation shifted with surprising smoothness, front row falling back as the second took their place with fresh shields. The raiders paused, seemingly surprised by the coordinated movement. "Flank them," the leader ordered, and one raider peeled off, moving to circle around the formation. "Krell!" James called. "Extend the left wing. Don't let them around us." To his surprise, Krell obeyed immediately, leading 3 others to shift position, extending their shield wall to block the flanking maneuver. The raider fired at the new formation, but the overlapping shields deflected the worst of the energy. The battle settled into a rhythm, raiders firing, shields rotating, positions adjusting to counter-flanking attempts. The children worked with growing confidence, their earlier training paying dividends in this life-or-death situation. But James could see their stamina flagging. The constant heat, the weight of the shields, the stress of combat, it was taking a toll. Several showed burn marks on their arms where energy weapons had grazed them. Their movements grew slower, less coordinated. The raiders noticed too. "They're weakening," the leader called. "One more push, and we're through." All 3 raiders advanced simultaneously, concentrating fire on a single point in the formation. The shields there began to glow white-hot, metal dripping like wax. "Sark Nera! Fall back!" James shouted, seeing their shields about to fail. Second line, reinforce! But there was no second line left. All the children were now engaged in the front. The shield wall was stretched too thin. As Sark and Nera tried to retreat, a gap opened in the formation. One raider saw it and lunged forward, energy blade extending from his gauntlet. The weapon arced toward Nera's exposed side. Without hesitation, Vern threw himself in front of her, his shield raised. The energy blade sliced through the shield and into his shoulder, the same shoulder injured earlier. The boy screamed, a high, keening sound that echoed through the chamber. Blue bioluminescent blood splattered across the floor. "Vern!" Sark cried, moving to protect his fallen comrade. The formation began to crumble as children broke position to help Vern or to avoid the advancing raiders. James saw the disaster unfolding, all their training collapsing in the face of real injury, real fear. "Reform!" he shouted. "Shield wall! Protect Vern!" Some responded, trying to rebuild the formation around their fallen comrade. Others hesitated, caught between training and instinct. The lead raider saw the confusion and charged directly for the gap, energy blade aimed at Sark, who knelt beside Vern. "Out of my way, fish kid," James didn't think. He moved. Sprinting forward, he threw himself between Sark and the raider. The energy blade, meant for the child's throat, ripped across his chest instead, cutting through jumpsuit and flesh with terrifying ease. Pain exploded through his body, white-hot and all-consuming. James staggered but remained standing, one hand pressed to the wound that seared his chest from collarbone to hip. Blood, red, not luminescent blue, spread between his fingers, dripping to the metal floor with a steady patter. The chamber fell silent. The children froze in their positions, staring at the fallen human, at the blood pooling beneath him. Even the raiders paused, surprised by his self-sacrifice. Then from the entrance to the chamber came a voice like thunder. "Enough!" Lyria swept into the room, flanked by adult Meridic warriors. Her armor gleamed in the emergency lights, and her tail lashed with such force that sparks flew where it struck the floor. The raiders turned to face the new threat, energy weapons raised, but they were too slow. Lyria and her warriors fell upon them with savage efficiency. Tails lashed, claws rent metal. Warriors swarmed the outnumbered humans. The battle was brutal and brief. James sank to his knees, vision blurring from blood loss. Through the haze of pain, he saw the children gathering around him, their earlier fear replaced by something like awe. Sark pressed his small hand against James's wound, trying to stem the bleeding. "Why?" the boy asked, echoing Krell's earlier question. "Why bleed for us?" James tried to answer, but coughing overtook him. Blood flecked his lips. Nera crouched beside him. "He protected us," she said softly, "as he taught us to protect each other." Krell approached slowly, his usual arrogance absent. "The surface thing has strength," he admitted reluctantly. Not the strength of claws or tail, but strength still. The crowd that had gathered above the battle, Meridic adults who had come to watch once the raiders were defeated, began to murmur ominously. Someone pointed at James, at his blood. "Weakness," a voice called out. "He falls while we stand." "Culling time," another voice joined in. And this time the crowd's response was different, hungrier, more vicious. "The weak do not survive dawn." The calls grew louder, more insistent, but now they carried an edge of violence that hadn't been there during the training. "Cull! Cull! Cull!" The chant began to spread through the gathering crowd. More Meridic adults poured into the chamber, drawn by the commotion. Their eyes glowed brighter as the blood scent reached them, their tails lashing in predatory excitement. "Fresh meat!" someone shouted from the back. "Alien flesh for the victory feast." The crowd pressed closer, those in front beginning to descend toward the floor of the chamber. Several drew curved blades, their ceremonial edges gleaming in the emergency lighting. "Stand back!" Krell suddenly snarled, positioning himself between the advancing crowd and James. "He is under royal protection." But the crowd was beyond reason now, driven by bloodlust and ancient instincts. "Move aside, whelp," an adult warrior bellowed. "This is not your choice." The mob surged forward, dozens of them now, climbing down from the viewing areas, their eyes blazing with hunger. The brood clustered around James's fallen form, shields raised, but they were children. What could they do against a crowd of adult warriors drunk on violence? Lyria strode forward, her massive form towering over James's crumpled figure. Her expression was thunderous, unreadable. The chamber fell silent, waiting for her judgment. But as she reached down, her hand closed not around his throat, but around something that had fallen from his pocket during the battle. The rusted rattle. She straightened, lifting the toy before all. Her glowing white eyes swept across the chamber, taking in the watching crowd, the injured children, the dead raiders, and James bleeding on the floor. "Silence!" she roared, her voice shaking dust from the ceiling. The mob froze mid-advance, suddenly remembering exactly who ruled here. "Strength," Lyria said, her voice like rolling thunder, "is not hunger. Strength is not the first kill, the loudest voice, the sharpest claw." She held the rattle higher. "Strength is holding life in your hands and not letting it go." The brood stared at their queen, horns lowered in what James, through his pain, recognized as shame. "The alien bleeds for our young," Lyria continued, "not for glory, not for power, for life itself." Her tail swept across the floor in a gesture that encompassed all her children. "As I would bleed for all of you," the crowd murmured uncertainly, their bloodlust cooling under their queen's withering gaze. She knelt beside James, examining his wound with clinical precision. "You chose the rusted toy over your ship's memory core," she said, quiet enough that only he could hear. "You chose substance over data." "Why?" James coughed, each breath a struggle. "Because some things can't be replaced." Lyria's eyes narrowed, studying him with new intensity. Then she raised her voice again, addressing the entire chamber. "The ancient law of Lysaria is clear. Blood spilled in defense of the brood binds the defender to the brood forever." A shock rippled through the crowd. Several adults made sounds of protest. Others clicked their teeth in apparent agreement. The debate spread rapidly, voices rising. "Silence!" Lyria commanded, and the chamber obeyed instantly. "I call tribunal. The final test approaches with dawn's light." James felt consciousness slipping away as his blood continued to pool beneath him. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Sark, clutching the rusted rattle to his chest, eyes glowing with what might have been tears. Dawn broke over the shattered domes of Lysaria, a different quality of light filtering through the coral glass, warmer and more golden than the artificial illumination of night. James woke to find himself on a raised platform in the center of what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber, much larger than the dock or the battle room. Bioluminescent tendrils pulsed beneath translucent patches on his chest, knitting his wounded flesh together with a pleasant numbness. Around him stood hundreds of the meridic people, arrayed in concentric circles that rose in tiers like an amphitheater. Their glowing eyes fixed on him from every direction, their collective gaze heavy with judgment. Before him, on a dais of polished stone, sat Lyria. She wore formal regalia now, elaborate armor that accentuated her horns and tail, inlaid with swirling patterns of bioluminescence that matched the glow of her eyes. At her feet knelt the brood, all 12 children, including Vern with his bandaged shoulder. They wore similar armor, though simpler in design, and each held a shield at their side. "The alien wakes," Lyria announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "The tribunal may begin." An elder meridic stepped forward from the crowd, older than Lyria, his horns weathered and scarred, his tail dragging slightly from some old injury. "The law is absolute," he intoned. "No surface dweller may join the brood." His interference was not requested. His blood, while spilled for us, taints our waters. Murmurs of agreement rose from sections of the crowd, but these murmurs quickly grew louder, more aggressive. "Cast him out," someone shouted. "Feed him to the depths." Another stepped forward, a female with elaborate striping on her horns. "The law is wisdom, but wisdom evolves." The alien taught the brood tactics that saved the hatchery. Without him, our youngest would now be dead. This too drew support from the gathering, but the opposition was becoming more vocal. "Weakness," called out a warrior with scars across his face. "He pollutes our young with soft thinking." The crowd began to divide visibly, some pressing forward in support of the elder's position, others backing the female who spoke for James. Tails lashed, voices rose, and the ceremonial nature of the tribunal began to dissolve into something more primal. "The alien brought raiders to our door," another voice accused. "His presence endangers us all." "Cull the weak," The familiar chant began again, this time taken up by nearly half the gathering. Cull! 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 The opposing side responded with their own chant. Honor the blood debt! Honor the blood debt! The chamber erupted into chaos. Meridic adults surged toward each other, arguments becoming confrontations. Some pushed toward the platform where James stood, their intentions clearly hostile. Others formed a barrier, trying to protect him. Enough! Lyria's voice boomed over the tumult, but this time it barely contained the mob. The crowd pressed closer to the platform, those supporting the elder's position now openly calling for James's immediate execution. Justice! They chanted. Purity! Weapons appeared, ceremonial blades and energy staffs that sparked with contained power. The tribunal was on the verge of becoming a riot, with James at the center. Finally, the elder who had spoken first raised his hand for silence, though it took several attempts before the crowd grudgingly obeyed. The final word belongs to the queen. What say you, Lyria of the Deep? All eyes turned to Lyria, who had watched the proceedings with impassive stillness. She rose now, her full height impressive even on this grand stage. The law speaks of blood and brood, she said, of strength and survival, of culling the weak and elevating the strong. Her tale coiled and uncoiled with deliberate slowness. But what is strength? What is weakness? These are the questions the alien forced us to consider. She descended from her dais, approaching James where he stood on the platform. The crowd's attention followed her every movement. He came with rust, she said, gesturing to Sark, who hesitantly held up the rattle. A child's toy from a dead world. Worthless. Yet he chose it over technology our salvagers tell me would have made him wealthy beyond measure in the surface world. This revelation sent ripples of surprise through the gathering. He taught our children to shield each other when we have always taught them to strike first. Weakness, we called it. Her glowing eyes swept the chamber. Yet these tactics saved the hatchery when direct assault failed. She reached the platform where James stood, towering over him. Look at him. No armor, no claws, no tail, no natural weapons. By all our measures, the weakest creature in this chamber. The crowd chittered in agreement. Yet he stepped between a raider's blade and a child not his own. Lyria's voice dropped lower, vibrating through the stone floor. I ask again, what is strength? What is weakness? From within her armor, she withdrew two objects. The rusted rattle and what appeared to be a medallion or amulet. A disc of the same blue steel as her skin, inlaid with intricate patterns of bioluminescence, suspended on a chain of interlocking segments. The royal amulet has passed from ruler to heir since the founding of Lysaria, she announced. It carries the memories, the wisdom, the strength of every queen before me. She held both objects aloft, one in each hand. Both are rust in time's ocean. Both carry memory. Both connect us to what came before, to what may come after. The crowd fell silent, sensing the weight of the moment. Before the people, Lyria proclaimed, I raise both my royal amulet and this alien toy. He came with rust. He leaves my brood alive. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising in unmistakable warning. Mock him again, and you mock your queen. Then she did something that shocked even James. She placed both objects in his palm, the royal amulet and the rusted rattle side by side. He sank for rust, she declared for all to hear, and surfaced father of her heirs. The proclamation hung in the chamber like a physical thing. No one moved, no one spoke. The implications were too enormous, too unexpected. Then from his position among the kneeling brood, Sark rose. He approached James, shield held against his chest. He knelt again, this time before James instead of Lyria. Father, he said, the word clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. Nera joined him, then Vern, then others. One by one, the entire brood knelt before James. Shields held against their chests, tails curled behind them like banners. Not in submission, he realized, but in acceptance. Of him, of what he had taught them, of a different kind of strength. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Shock, outrage, confusion, acceptance. But none dared contradict their queen's proclamation openly. James closed his fingers around the amulet and the rattle, feeling the weight of both. One representing power, the other love. Both forms of strength, both necessary. He looked at Lyria, whose expression remained stern, but whose eyes held something new. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper that had no name in either of their languages. Beyond the dome of the ceremonial chamber, through the coral glass, he could see the vast alien ocean stretching into darkness. Somewhere above lay the surface, the stars, other worlds. His old life, with all its running and hiding. For now, there was work to be done here, in the deep, a brood to raise, strength to redefine. James looked down at the kneeling children, his children now by royal decree, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 long years. Purpose, family, home. Rise, he said softly, and they did. 12 pairs of glowing eyes fixed on him, with expressions ranging from awe to lingering skepticism. Even Krell, whose pride still radiated from every line of his posture, seemed willing to consider this new reality. We have much to learn from each other, James said, and much to build together. Lyria's mouth curved in what might almost have been a smile. Indeed, she said, dawn has broken. The test is passed. Her tail curled with finality. Let the teaching truly begin.